All right, welcome to our first ever live stream for Barrett News Media. I'm Dimitri Ravanas. He is Jason Barrett. I guess for camera purposes, he is Jason Barrett. All right, JB. So we got a lot to get into. First of all, we need to talk about the brand new BNM Top 20. Just ended on Tuesday in terms of the first year of the list. We'll get to that in a moment. But let's start with the BNM Summit. We're doing it for the first time in September. It is going to be in Nashville, which has sort of become the talk radio New York at this point. So, walk me through what people can expect.
I mean, look, it's essentially going to be a condensed version of what we've done with BSM. When I rolled out the sports summit back in 2018 in Chicago, wanted to make sure that I had everything right before we went to a larger scale. Now we've done a bunch of sports conferences the last few years. We know how to deliver a live event. And so obviously the content changes, the people change, the focus changes, but it's a business conference. The overall goal is to arm the people in that room with information to help them get back to their businesses and ultimately grow them. News Talk is a format does 2.5 times the size of Sports Talk. You're over 2,000 stations strong, which is larger than country. Which is only larger by the country format. So it's a massive format, very important for the health of the radio industry. I do think, there's been a shift over the last year or two with the format, with introducing some bigger new voices on the national scale. A lot of that was obviously necessary because Rush Limbaugh passed. But this is a format that, has got to deal with a lot of threats in the digital space. It's very right-leaning. There are not a lot of left-leaning options out there. Some that may be good or bad for business. I'm not really sure. And so over the next 9 months, my goal will be to deliver and put together an agenda that's going to help the host, the GM, the PD, the advertising professional, the executive, the digital department. I see some things in the News Talk format from a digital perspective that I think could be much better. And I think there's some practices we can introduce that will help some brands get stronger in that regard. So again, we'll try to bring as many different groups together, get as much brain power on stage as possible. And we picked an outstanding city in Nashville with a great setup at Vanderbilt University. And so I'm excited to do it. It's Thursday, September 14th. And if it goes how I expect, we'll continue to do it for years to come. But it only works if people show up, right?
Right, exactly. And for people that have never been to a BSM summit before, and look, there's going to be some crossover. How many friends do we have that are programmers of both a news and a sports station, or GMs of a news and a sports station? If you haven't been to a BSM summit before, what I have always liked about being associated with it is I don't think a lot of people come in assuming they know the answers. And This is a space, the News Talk space, obviously. JB's background is in sports talk radio, so is mine. So, we are going to be there to learn just as much as everybody else. And that's what makes these things so great. Speaking of learning, tell me a little bit about what you learned coming out of the first BNM Top 20 lists. I mean, let's begin with just how much respect and love there is out there for KFI and WWL.
Listen, I knew KFI was a beast.
Yeah.
But sometimes, when you're in this industry, you talk to people and everybody tells you that and you hear that. And you may put the radio station on and go, yeah, they sound like they're the real deal. But when you grab a lot of different opinions from a lot of different broadcasting groups, you never really know where it's going to land. Like, for example, if I ran this process and of the 44 voters, 30 of them were in iHeart, you would go, yeah, that makes sense, right? But if I did this process and 30 were from Odyssey, would they vote for iHeart brands? Maybe not, right? Which is why I try to make sure that we've got a wide spectrum covered with all of these groups. It's why you'll see us constantly promote all the different regions where these groups are, 36 cities, 15 broadcast groups, because I try to make sure that it doesn't get weighted. I don't want to This isn't like the PPM world where 1 or 2 meters shift the whole thing. I need to make sure that there's some good balance here when we're trying to provide a collective sample and snapshot of the industry's opinion on what resonates. And the 2 brands you alluded to, they stood out on a different scale than most. KFI was dominant in the major market category, won every award except the Station of the Year. And even then, they were real close to catching WTOP. TOP did great too. I mean, no surprise. It's the largest revenue driver of radio
Right.
stations. And so those 2 wasn't a surprise. WLW in the mid-markets, look, mid-market categories, for anyone who's new to this and hasn't looked at our top 20s before, or even if you've looked at them on the sports side and you're not really familiar with the process, I will tell you, mid-market is harder to win than major. And the reason for that, when you take 20 markets, which is what the major markets are, naturally you're going to have less options in there than you are in a mid-market. A mid-market is market 21 to market 500. Now,
exactly.
Realistically, if you're in market 500, I don't think 44 program directors are going to find you and put you into, the same class as an LW, a KMOX, a BT, and those kind of brands. So, we can't just say, here's the whole industry, vote on it. We try to pick, okay, who's really had some success in some of these cities. Like, for example, a KMJ in Fresno does really well. So does a KNRS in Salt Lake City. Well, they're on the document. Whether or not they get votes comes down to what people prefer and what they consider to be success. And so mid-markets are always tougher, but one thing that was finding WLW at the top spot of the ballots. They crushed in every region except winning Afternoon Drive, which went to Hammer and Nigel at WIBC in Indianapolis. So those were the clear 2 biggest winners by far.
The thing that I find interesting as we work longer on the news talk side, and you and I had this conversation privately before we made the top 20 list public, is there are so many different versions of talk radio, right? Like there is the political talk. There is plenty of, and look, KFI is a little bit more entertaining talk. There is straight news. I mean, I found it really interesting looking at each of the top 20 lists. I don't think you could get a consensus for what is the talk radio now, because there really isn't one, but clearly the appeal exists in every version of talk radio. Like every different type of talk radio did well in these polls.
Here's something really interesting about that. And I will be honest, I think we've got work to do to make this better in year 2. And what you just touched on is the thing that I wrestle with. Is this a news talk radio? Is it a news radio? Is it a talk radio? Is it do we put NPR into the mix? Because then that's a different world, right?
Right.
And so, when you go to, for example, if you look at some of the shows that did well, any of the brands that were news radio stations, you take a WCBS in New York, a TOP, WBBM in Chicago, they're really known for the brand and the information more so than the show, even though they may have some outstanding anchors and personalities that get involved and are obviously a big part of the listener's life. But you could argue that, yes, that is a different category than comparing what an anchor does on CBS to what a talk show host is doing on WMAL is a different deal, right? And so there's some things in there that I look at and I go, yeah, I wonder how we could evolve that in the future. The one challenge with that sometimes is, especially when you get into major market categories. And one of the things that I looked at was when they do the Marconi Awards, they say the best news talk brand, the best news talk show. They don't have here's the news anchor award, the NPR award, and this award. It's the full award. And so there's never been this perfect thing. The biggest challenge you have is that so many news talk stations are served by national shows. Right. And a lot of those national shows do take a heavier political slant with the content they present. But I think there's something really interesting here. When you look at WLW, KFI, some of the brands that really resonated with people, WIBC, they're doing talk. And I can tell you, I got a lot of private feedback from some high-ranking executives and programmers who were really appreciative of that, because I think one of the challenges some people deal with is sometimes you get viewed as just being a political spectrum, when the reality is there's a lot more to talk than there is just dissecting whether you like Trump or Biden or DeSantis or whoever. So I think, there's obviously value in both. It just comes down to that how we fine tune that going forward will be a challenge that, I'm interested in trying to figure out. And I do think one of the things that will help us with that, I was really happy with the participation this year. We had 44 people out of the chute. When I started BSM, I had to plead with people, and I've been in sports my whole life. So, I think one of the things that helped is that people know they can trust us. They know that I'm not out there making anyone look bad and exposing their ballots. And if you want real participation, you have to provide that confidentiality. Otherwise, you won't get real answers. Because listen, if I was a programmer, you think I'm going to send you a ballot you're going to put out in public that shows I didn't vote for my own show? No, I have to do that. So I see that stuff, and it's because trust has been earned. But the one thing that I want to accomplish going forward, if we do this again next year, is I want to grow that participation because, we've had sports hit 50 to 60, but that's with a format of 750 brands.
Right.
You get to a format with 2,000, I think we're probably going to have to be at 80 at some point. And so, will that make it perfect? No. I tell everybody this is an inexact science, okay? You can't make everybody happy. There's always going to be someone. I've had plenty in the last week and a half. Do you realize my digital following? Do you know how my ratings are? Do you know that I did this? And I get it. But what I do is I ask the industry. I get their feedback. We have a point system for a reason. If you get a first place vote, it's worth 20 points. You get a first place, a 20th ranked vote, that's 1 point. I add it up. Where it lands, it lands. I don't go in playing favorites. If it was the Jason Barrett top 20, that'd be different. But, I have to represent what the industry feels. And so we've got work to do, but overall, I was pretty happy with the process.
I like that we are bringing the AP Top 25 formula of ranking system to news radio now here with this. All right, so I'm going to ask you a little bit about what is coming to the brand in the future here in just a moment. But I do want you to expand a little bit on that idea that top-level executives are reaching out and saying thank you for the recognition that some of these stations that, like you said, are not just the political spectrum are getting. Because I think one of the most interesting things, look, I've written about this before. I was a September call-up, let's say, to talk radio where I just didn't stick and make the main roster. And I found it was really hard to do anything other than politics with the audience. I, too, was really encouraged by looking at the top 20 and seeing that the reputation of a KFI, the reputation of a WLW, excuse me, these stations have been delivering entertainment, community-focused radio that is not just about screaming who is right and who is wrong for a long time. And the industry took notice. I don't know if there's fallout from that. I genuinely don't know that tomorrow, that means everybody abandons politics for more lifestyle topics. But it does show you, it does require something like a top 20, I think, to sort of shake loose that stereotype of, news talk radio is just a bunch of right-wing talking points.
Here's the thing that you got to remember. First of all, local is different than national.
Right.
First of all, when you're someone on Sean Hannity's level with 700 stations and you're talking to a nation every night on television, you have a different expectation of what you have to deliver as a host, and he satisfies that. There's a reason why he was number one in the national space, right? And so on the national scale, those are big issues and obviously, if you look at the success of some of these shows across the country with their ratings, that works. It absolutely works.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that
side.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, as divisive as our politics in the country have become in terms of getting an audience, that is the broadest appeal. So I do understand that.
Well, and it's also hard. Like if you're a national host, you really can't spend every ounce of your time talking about a local market. You have to talk about broader stuff. Whereas if you're in a local market, you don't want to be the guy that they find at a grocery store and they're screaming at you in the aisle, And
Right.
so you have to bring people together. You got to talk about issues that are a little more of local relevance. You have to, go out and do fundraisers and talk about what movies you watch and the different things that make you a human being to people in the local community. And so I think there's a blend. I think that's why you see a lot of, especially the successful news talk stations, they typically have some local footprint. They might also interject some national. And overall, I think there's room for both. I don't think it should be one or the other. What was interesting, and there's something I learned in this that really jumped out to me that I was like, some people in sports could really look at this and learn from it. What was really impressive on the News Talk program directors list in major markets, 3 of the top 5 best programmers were women.
Yep.
4 in the top 20 were women. And I look at sports talk, and we've talked about this before, about the need for having different voices and styles. I just think sports should be the brand, the type of format you run to, right? News talk can be a little more challenging. Yet there are women that are kicking ass in this format, love the format. And I'm going, all right, well, someone at some point gave them a shot to grow and become leaders. Sports talk should be looking at this going, hey, if they can develop 4 or 5 top ass-kicking program directors in this format, what's our excuse? Because it's talk. Can you manage people? Can you come up with creative ideas? Clearly, they're doing something right when the best ones are coming from the female spectrum and it's not men.
Yeah, for sure. So I said I wanted to ask you a bit about what the plans are for BNM in 2023. We mentioned in September we are doing the summit. I also mentioned earlier that both you and I come from a sports background. We had a lot of conversations before we launched BNM back in 2020, and we've gotten to that point now where it's time for us to close that knowledge gap a bit, right? Like it's time for us to start to know the things that we don't know. And so I'm going to let you talk about this search that we have going on right now. But if you are out there in the news talk space, whether it is you don't want to be in a building anymore, whether it is you are having trouble advancing the way you want to in a building, whether it is you are, I mean, like I've said this about myself on the sports side. I like sports just fine, but I'm not a sports guy. I'm a radio guy, right? I know where my strength is. If that describes you on the news talk side, we do have an opportunity here with us at BNM. And JB, I'm going to let you take it away and sort of do the hard sell here, but we are looking for that right person right now.
What you're touching on is we need an editor on the news side. And, I'm proud of how BNM has grown the last 2 years. I think we're much further along now, especially like if you go back to the beginning of BSM, everyone's well aware. It took me 3 years before I had anyone else writing for the site. It's obviously picked up a lot of steam the last few years, and I'm trying to obviously get BNM to that part. We started BNM with a handful of writers, which was already an advantage to where BSM was. But if you look at the last year especially, one thing you touched on there is, our backgrounds. And I'm with you. I'm a radio guy first. I'm not a sports radio guy. I love sports. I love news. I love music. Like Stephanie, my fiance, will tell you, who handles sales for us. If I'm listening to music, if I'm in the car, I'm listening to music first.
Mm-hmm.
I go on Sirius XM's Octane. That's the first stop. Then I'll go to sports. Then I'll drop in on news. As I think this is just part of, as you get older in the business, I love the business. I want to help brands grow their business. I'm not just, sitting there like today I'm in New York, Carlos Correa signed with the Mets instead of the Giants. My day doesn't revolve around that. My day looks at that and goes, how would I take that and turn that into a revenue opportunity if I'm working with the station in New York or San Francisco or anywhere else? And what should we do from a publishing standpoint on the website? That's it. So, for me, that's the main focus. I think with B&M, one thing I recognized a year ago is we needed people with a little more experience writing about it. That I don't, you know me well enough. You and I don't always see the same on some social issues. I don't give a damn.
Mhm.
It's got nothing to do with that. It's about what's good content that is going to serve the entire industry. Like, I don't want our website to be left, right. I want it to be serving the news media professional, whether you work at the Huffington Post or whether you work at Westwood One and you're doing a conservative talk show. Don't care. Like, both have value, both reach audiences. And so I think for us going forward, when I brought Andy Bloom and Jim Crines on, we've already had really good contributions from Pete Mundo, Doug Pucci, Rick Schultz, our news writers, Eduardo and Ryan. And, we brought in Bill Zito. We've been trying to strengthen the staff to make sure that we have things there every day that people want to read. You and Garrett have contributed behind the scenes to make sure we have content up. But like anything, I mentioned earlier, 2.5 times the size of sports. There's a lot more ground to cover. And so to do that, you got to have people that have a passion for it. And I think one of the challenges we run into is that people see our brand. They know what we do in sports. They like sports. It's more fun, right? News Talk's a little more serious. And you know what? I've got enough help on the sports side. I need help on the news side. But when I say news, this is the other challenge, and I know I'm going on and on here, but and you know me, I'll do this for an hour. The challenge we run into is sometimes people hear news and they think they're going to write about political. They think they're going to write about the stock market, or they're going to write about the vaccine and Dr. Fauci. And no, I don't care about any of that. It has nothing to do with what our focus is. Our focus is on the radio broadcasters, the TV broadcasters, the podcasters, the advertisers, anything that's going to benefit a news media professional. And so you have to have a passion for broadcasting. That's where it, begins and ends. And so we've got some work to do. One thing that I want to make sure I'm clear on, I think sometimes people, they assume just because I consult on the sports side, that means that, like, okay, I'm only going to write content that'll serve clients, or I'm only going to hire people that won't be in the way of that. Andy Bloom can do consulting. Okay. He writes for the site. He's a damn sharp guy. I've got no issue with that. Like, look, I can't service 2,700 stations out there. I'm one guy. So good people that have something to offer, and brands want to work with them, by all means. I've got no issue. My ego is not that big. I can make it work as long as they give us good content on the website to arm the industry with good content and information every day. If we do that, I'll be happy. Obviously, a lot to do, but really encouraged by what we've seen, with the growth of the top 20, the summit coming, and then obviously just the day-to-day content.
All right, so I'm going to give people JB's address because it doesn't involve me having to spell my name. Jay Barrett at Sports Radio PD, if you are interested, or if if you're watching this and you have somebody in your building that you think could really fill this role perfectly, or just somebody who is out of the business right now, whatever the case may be, if you feel like you can help us out, Jay Barrett at Sports Radio PD, and they'll talk to me, they'll talk to Jason. We're not going to stop until, I talked to a PD, or excuse me, a GM of a sports station recently, who used the phrase, I don't have a deadline for getting it right. Right. So we are looking for the right person. There is no, like, this has to be done by January 15th kind of mentality.
And I'll say this, first, I'm not going nowhere. Like, this is not going anywhere anytime soon. Like, we may pivot and have to do different things as the business evolves, but we're going to be doing this for a while. This is also full time. I'm not looking for, when we started the brand, we needed people to just drop in. I mean, you're building a business. You have no help. You don't really have any clients. You're trying to grow. Now we're in a pretty decent spot, and I want to make sure we take care of our clients, that I can take care of our advertising partners. If we're going to do a summit, that we deliver for people, not just, get 200 people to hang out in a room together. And so to do that, you got to have good help. And so that's a priority. Before we wrap, I do want to make sure to thank everyone who voted, because there were some people that were part of this that have known me, and that obviously helps. That being said, there were some people that I don't know that well that were willing to trust us and get involved in the process. And I appreciate not only that they, took the time to go through the ballots, make their choices, and send them in to me, but that they listened to some brands. They studied something. Look, the one thing that you'll never have perfect, and I deal with this when I talk to people in it who want to give feedback on it, they'll go, yeah, but how many of them listen to every show? And you think every programmer is going to listen to 2,000 shows? It's not going to happen. But you know what they will do? They'll look at ratings. They'll know if somebody's got, an ability to create buzz. They'll test their ear. Are you one of the top 20 or 30 shows they think about? And if you're not on their radar, there might be a reason. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a taste test. Everybody's got different tastes, and some are going to do a little deeper homework than others. But the reason why I involved the industry in this is that was the whole reason for starting the top 20 in the first place. I always felt these kind of things were determined by people outside the business. And we could easily do that. Like you and I and a couple on our crew, we probably listen to more radio than most programmers do.
Absolutely.
Okay. That being said, we would be in the same boat as every other group that ever has done this. And by the way, I have no issue with any other group doing it. I think the more attention we put on these people doing this, the better it helps them with their stories, to being able to go out to advertisers and say, hey, this is business you should be involved in. And so I'm all for the as much coverage as possible in the industry. But I do understand that some, take a risk when they fill out a ballot and send it in, especially when you don't have a lengthy relationship with someone. So I appreciate that. And I do want to congratulate Premier, Joe Rogan, which, by the way, I mean, we know Rogan's a big deal. I was blown away. That's the biggest win I've had ever in a top 20. Like, literally over 220 points separated him in second place. I would have had to take second and third, put them together, and they beat Rogan by 15 points.
Wow.
That's massive.
For sure.
So, I mean, Spotify they're paying a lot of money. They should be expecting that kind of dominance. But Premier, Spotify, WIBC, WLW, KFI, TOP, they all had wins, and it was a really good first showing.
All right, so Jay Barrett at sportsradiopd.com if you are interested in the editor position. September 14th in Nashville for the BNM Summit. Thank you to everybody that participated. We hope to hear from all of you here real soon. And thanks for joining us on the first ever BNM live stream. And shout out to Elon Musk that shut down the Twitter feed in the middle of this.